Lawyers of Reddit. At what point, when working for a defendant, did you realize my client is a monster? A lot of years ago I used to work as a solicitor's representative. Cases go to Crown Court. Barrister deals and I'm there for paperwork. Additional stuff with client etc. 70-something-year-old man had been in jail for 15 years for an assault on a child. Solicitor and barrister working on getting him released due to him getting clean reports from just about everyone. Guards took him out of jail to a dentist, and as he entered the waiting room he saw 2 children and ran straight at them. Guard stopped him. 3 weeks later at court I was the one that sat him down in a room to explain that no, this isn't a hearing to release you. It is so you can be committed to a mental health secure facility for the rest of your life. He didn't take that well. I shed no tears. Well, that's absolutely terrifying. He was obviously ill, but I wonder what was going on in his brain to instantly try and attack them. Damn, kids wouldn't stay off his lawn. Anal but a legal assistant. We got a client off of a murder charge. 2 weeks later she was caught with a similar weapon and situation, except this time the guy didn't die. If I've learned anything from watching all the episodes of Snapped, it's that if you're going to kill a second husband and get away with it, you really have to change up your methods. Not the client, but my managing partner. The client was a senile 90-year-old man. He wanted to sell land worth a little less than $1 billion to some businessmen. Suffice to say there were many who wanted to take advantage of the situation. One such person, to my dismay, was our managing partner. The partner wanted to insert a provision that would have effectively funneled about 60% of the proceeds solely to him. You could see how his eyes gleamed at the mere mention of money. The provision got lost in the revisions. I was doing the revisions. I'm no longer part of that scummy firm. Did you consider bringing it to whatever governing body you're under? This sounds like legal malpractice. Hi, law student here. Just took a professional responsibility course. Definition: legal malpractice. Lawyers aren't allowed to acquire an interest in a client's business except in very narrow circumstances, none of which fit the case here. Lawyer here. This is less legal malpractice and more actual fraud. He isn't taking an interest in the business. He is basically stealing it. Hi, not a lawyer here. This is either illegal or legal. I'm on the other side. But I've got a defendant who went to prison for starving 3 adopted children to the point that they needed weeks of hospitalization. Then got out of prison and married a guy with children so that she could start starving them too. Listening to her interview, where she attempts to justify what she did to both sets of kids, disturbed me more than any of the murder cases I've worked on. What was her justification? She did nothing wrong. She was just trying to help them be healthy and beautiful. She felt bad for the first set of kids because they needed her, etc. It wasn't my case, but I've seen the pictures. The first set of kids looked like Holocaust survivors. They were 4 to 5, and she had them completely brainwashed to think only she would ever love them. We had a client try and enforce a post-employment restraint against a 19-year-old receptionist after she quit and started working for a competitor. The reason? He wanted to make her life hell because she wouldn't sleep with him. A creepy 57-year-old man. Him trying to sleep with her was the reason she quit. Unsurprisingly, he didn't take our advice to discontinue his claim, and so we ended up sending him elsewhere. See, this right here shows the one thing many different type of assholes share. They don't know when to fucking stop. He could have been done for sexual harassment, and he got away with it. But he had to keep going. Not once thinking he'd done something wrong. My wife had a similar asshole boss. She worked for a company that recruited nurses. They had a horribly written non-compete agreement that basically restricted you from working in the medical field for 5 years and within 500 miles. Too restrictive. She would also forge signatures by cutting and pasting in Adobe. So, wife eventually quits and works at a similar job. She had never signed the non-compete, and we knew it. Well, we get a letter from her attorney with a signed non-compete. I called up the attorney. I told him that we were willing to take this controversy to trial, but in an act of good faith I wanted him to send me the original PDF file of the document and make the wet ink original available for inspection at his office, and we could attempt to resolve this out of court. We never heard from him again. But my wife's current employer did. They threatened to sue them if they didn't fire her. Well, my wife then had to explain the situation to her new boss and their attorneys. Well, new company and old company had a mutual client. New boss felt he had an obligation, just wanted to poach the jobs, to inform the client of the fraud allegations, and advise them to do a full audit of the original records. They did and ended up ending their contract with wife's old company. We get a letter from a new attorney, this time threatening to sue and claiming millions in damages for divulging trade secrets. Call this new attorney and advise that the trade secrets were fraud and it was divulged through the course of pending litigation brought by his client. Never heard from them after that. I listened to a 911 call where the victim's throat was slit while on the call by our client. I will never forget her gurgling and sounding like she was dying. Somehow she ultimately lived through this, saying, "He killed me. He killed me." Apostrophe. That is not something I ever wish to hear. I feel bad even after reading it. I listened to a video once of a 911 call with a guy in one of the Twin Towers as it collapsed on him. Years later it still haunts me at times. Physically hearing someone's last moments on earth is absolutely haunting, especially when added to the sheer dread and desperate yawn you can hear in their voice. I can't even fathom what the 911 operator felt. Just from your description I know you're talking about Kevin Cosgrove. I also listened to his 911 call just once, years ago, and it has been permanently affixed to my mind. Once was enough. I will never forget it. May he rest in peace. She tried to sell her baby. I found out during a hearing, in front of the judge. The people who try to sell babies surprise me. The people who try to buy babies confound me. They do. Until you read the rest of the replies in here and notice that all that CP must come from somewhere. Then, I notice that the people who try to buy babies horrify me to hell. There are tons of kids up for adoption, but relatively few babies. Adoption agencies make so much money granting babies to couples that can't conceive their own, that there have been cases of getting them from gray sources. The eventual families often have no idea. The United States is responsible for most inter-country adoptions in the world. 20,000 out of the total 30,000 total orphans adopted annually. The Westerners who adopt from developing nations pay thousands of dollars to process the paperwork of one child. This provides a lucrative incentive for those involved in the process. 3. In many cases, the prospective adoptive parents are motivated by a sense of altruism, coupled with their desire to overcome infertility and fulfill the Western standard of the nuclear family. 4. These adoptive parents create a demand for healthy infants that will be able to assimilate into their new home and cut off ties to their birthplace and culture of origin. 5. Prospective adoptive parents are placed with the orphans through adoption agencies, brokers, or advertising agencies online. 6. Due to the fact that most of the children adopted overseas are so young, they will not have any memories of their birth families. Without a paper trail and without any input from the child, it makes it near impossible to detect whether a child is truly an orphan. My sister is adopted from Russia, so I've heard some horror stories. We know she was not an orphan. My parents have been in contact with her birth mom who had to give her up because she couldn't support 2 kids. Siberia is a hellhole. There was one couple in the adoption group we are a part of who found out the adoption agency they went to, the owner had been found guilty of, from what I understand, human trafficking of babies and a few other charges. Basically the guy took kidnapped newborns and helped get them into U.S. families. Oh, I can share a good story. I had a teacher in high school who was a former lawyer. We always asked him why, gave up his practice to start teaching. He finally caved and explained that his last case was the deaths of 3 people. Apparently there had been a 4th. It was 2 couples who in the act of a drunken, drugged out orgy, decided to kill, partially eat, and dismember one of the women. I guess it seemed like a good idea at the time. As a lawyer, he said it was pretty open and shut, but he had to get his clients the best result possible, and he was exposed to all the horrid details, the pictures, and their reasoning. My teacher had such a far off look when he explained it that we could see it really got to him. Did he ever say what their reasoning was? If I recall, he said something about them saying she wasn't right or along those lines. And the other detail that I remember was the body parts were put into trash bags and then into an oil drum. How do so many bodies end up in oil drums? I wouldn't even know where to find one. The first and last family law case was assigned to me as a first-year associate. My client broke his wife's jaw and said if they were home in Russia he would have killed her because he could pay his way out of prison there. My mom is a lawyer. This is the story about how she quit being a public defender. When you are a public defender you don't get to choose your cases. She got assigned a young man who, with the help of his friend, had gotten a kitten from a free to a good home ad in the paper. They then brought it home and gave it to their dog as a chew toy. I think they also filmed it. So yeah, she said she needed a shower after every meeting with him. Cancelled her PD contract after the case concluded. I work for an animal rescue charity and those free to a good home situations end badly more often than you like to think. Have heard lots of horror stories, especially with dogs, who are given away. Free animals have a far higher chance of being used for baiting etc. That's how I got my greyhound. Local thugs were throwing a bull fetch with a puppy in heavy traffic. They were going to use it for dog fighting fodder. I just stole the dog. Lived to be 12 and the best dog. Fuck them. Scum should die. I do like how my mom's ex got his dog. The guy across the street was beating it. He walked out and said you hit the dog again I will take it. The guy hit the dog and he hit him in the face with an axe handle. Dog was his from that point on. Never mess with a guy with an axe. You may get to be his next tree. I'll go ahead and say it. When I practiced family law and criminal defense, I trusted and believed my criminal defense clients 100x more than my divorce/custody clients. The worst monsters are the people who manipulate minor children for custody reasons. Fuck them. Luckily I'm out of that area of law. Hopefully for good. My parents divorced when I was 12. My piece of shit mother, though my father was worse, stopped at a lawyer's office and made me get out of the car and go inside the office. She sobbed hysterically, fake, and when we finally left I asked why I had to be there. Somehow through her narcissism, possibly because of pride over this, she told me so he can see who he's hurting, me, my alcoholic, abusive, narcissistic asshole of a mother straight up said in different words to my face I used you as a pawn fuck parents/people like this. I've done a lot of prison legal aid, and I could tell stories about child molesters that would turn you green. But instead I'll turn you green a different way. I had a kid, 17, who was mildly cognitively disabled due to brain trauma he sustained at the hands of his birth parents, who ended up with a really wonderful foster care family and thrived. He was a popular kid in school, good athlete, got a girlfriend, and invited her to meet up and be teenagers one night in a corn silo, which I guess is a thing that country kids do. I don't know. This all comes from the pre-sentence investigation report I read before taking his case. But this girl met him at the silo and they were hanging out inside. By his account, they were having a nice time and he was really enjoying himself. Then for no particular reason, he picked up a 2x4 and bashed her skull in. He then used a combination of very crude farm implements, shovels, hose, to chop her body up and bury it in the corn, and went home like nothing had happened. Sounds like he acted on one of those dark thoughts people randomly get. Had a divorce client, husband and father, who disowned his autistic son. Tried to argue that he should get all of his wife's retirement having not worked for 12 years. Contacted me during the height of Hurricane Sandy. He was in the Bronx and me in Manhattan, saying he wanted to hold his wife in contempt for not paying him that day while the storm slammed New York City. Told me I was making a huge mistake getting married. My wedding date was November 3rd, 4 days after Sandy, saying that I was going to be miserable and regret it. I could go on. But the worst was when, several months later, since his divorce was taking a long time, he sent death threat letters to myself and my wife saying that he had hired an executor to kill the two of us if his divorce wasn't finalized in 60 days. Called the police and they said he left his premises one day earlier. I heard nothing from him until February 2014, when he emailed me saying he needed a winter coat from his wife, and could I help get it for him. Ironically, the divorce didn't have to be completed because he killed himself before the judge signed the judgment of divorce. TL. Doctor, miserable guy who wanted to spread his misery, and crossed the line when he threatened to kill my wife. For something a little lighter, this Memorial Day weekend reminds me of not my worst client, but definitely my dumbest. I was representing her on a child custody and child support matter. She was calling me on Memorial Day saying she really needed to speak to me. I called her back and asked if it was urgent since it was Memorial Day and all. She said, "Oh, I didn't think that you celebrated Memorial Day, so I thought you were going to be available because so many people have pointed it out." I have now put the word executor in quotes because that was his word and not mine. Also, since people have questioned it, my username is also the name of my firm. I had a client who was accused of domestic violence. Essentially, he threw his girlfriend out of a second-story window. Now he's got a terrible history, but so do a lot of my clients, and his attitude is a little entitled. Also typical. But he also knows the deal and wants a plea deal. So I'm not really prepared when he absolutely refuses the no jail offer from the state. Keep in mind there were like 5 witnesses. Why? Because they wanted him to pay for her medical bills. Okay, an asshole, but whatever, not the worst. What I did was his counter offer. I ain't paying that bitch's bills. Tell them I'll pay for the window. Prosecutor was not happy. A bit shocked to learn that by throwing someone out of a second-story window in front of 5 witnesses, it was possible for him to get offered no jail time. The first week I started at my current criminal defense firm, I was tasked with cataloging discovery from our client's phone. The phone had multiple talking around 4,000 videos, photos, text exchanges with women under 16, though not all of the girls' ages were confirmed. Most, if not all, were under the legal age of consent, and many were barely pubescent, naked and being prostituted over 1 year. He would lure these girls in exchange for drugs. Nothing felt totally bizarre until I came across one video where he was clearly forcing himself upon a literal child who was so high on benzodiazepines, not willingly but rather forced, and choking her in the process. When our firm confronted him, he said he was in love with her and that's why he did it. He would also take these girls to hotels and make them have sex with one another while he taped. But nothing beat what I said above. Pretty horrifying stuff for my first week on the job. When this person, an executive, said she was firing any employee who had a serious illness or injury while promoting fundraisers at a local church for cancer sufferers, no less, in part because employees, thinking she'd be sympathetic, would reveal their confidential health info to her. Isn't that super illegal to do? Well, she wasn't firing them because of their medical issues. The employees with medical issues just always seem to be poor performers at their jobs. That excuse is unfortunately pretty airtight, but I think specifically stating that you're doing that is something not even it can get you out of. Criminal defense lawyer. I can name a few instances where I was just absolutely disgusted with my client. Caveat: these are mostly years ago when I was taking just any old case. I most practice white collar and federal now. 1. I won a DUI case because the government messed up on something right before trial was to begin. My client gives me a hug and completely reeks of alcohol. He has driven to court. I took his keys and called his mother. 2. Client who was accused of molesting a 12-year-old. He was mid-40s at the time, and I had to shut him down real quick when he tried to tell me how the 12-year-old was coming onto him. 3. I represented a woman for a grand theft charge. Left her in my office to get some things copied before she left. After she left, I realized my sunglasses and car keys were stolen. I tracked her down in the lobby and told her I was not going to represent her anymore and I would call the police if she didn't empty her pockets in front of me and give me my things for. I had a client who was released after 25 years in prison for murder, and then the same day he beats up his prospective new landlord. He ended up getting another 10 years. He was unrepentant and laughed about how he hit the guy so hard his eyeball popped out. I thought, This guy deserves to be in prison. Took the case to trial anyway and, shocker, lost and he got 10, the maximum. 5. Client who pretended to be a doctor so he could sell steroids. According to the Gov, he had numerous clients who were made to believe that his steroids would cure their cancer. They paid him hundreds of thousands of dollars and some of them died. I just thought that was pure evil. Defended my client in a lawsuit who defrauded his business partners. Evidence was already overwhelming that my client was liable. Client made matters worse by fabricating evidence and presenting it in court. He got called out on it by his dad's attorney, who had the same evidence. It tanked my client's case. My client continued lying to me despite the overwhelming evidence showing he fabricated evidence. He lost big. In addition to a large judgment, he got hit with several felonies for fabricating evidence. Also, the business partners my client screwed over were his dad and brother. Client made matters worse by fabricating evidence and presenting it in court. I saw this once in a depot and I'll never forget it. I was working a med mal case, defending a distantly related party to the lawsuit. I was a first-year attorney sent to babysit this depot because we literally had nothing to worry about. The defendant updated their discovery to admit something embarrassing about their client. He sexually harassed a young woman in a medical setting. The deposition was of the plaintiff's best friend. Most of the deposition was standard stuff. I joined objections, but otherwise had nothing to do with it. We got about 2 hours deep and the attorney running the deposition got to her, and then what happened next style question set up for narrative framework. The friend then exhaustively detailed overhearing a phone call where she listened to her ancient as heck friend get sexually harassed by a doctor. The attorney tried to interrupt, but she just kept talking. The defendants ate this up because it suddenly shifted the case to be a totally different thing from med mal and the support was garbage. The plaintiff's attorney called for a break. But you can't put the genie back in the bottle. That was a pretty fun day. I also billed out a ton for that one which never hurts. My so's mother, L, was abusive. She frequently hit her husband, was a compulsive liar, and just generally made her family miserable. When they were settling the divorce, the judge initially deemed a testimony from the kids, my so and her brother, unnecessary. Probably because they were minors at the time, and testifying against one of their parents would be hard on them, to say the least. However, the lawyer representing L was really insistent that they testify. Well, it must have been a shock to the lawyer to suddenly have 2 more witnesses with dozens of accounts of driving under the influence, domestic violence, etc. We figured L must have lied to her lawyer about some significant details because they were completely caught off guard and more than a little angry after the testimony. We like to believe it helped solidify some of the criminal charges placed against her. It was a nice bit of karma after years and years of gaslighting and false rumors that her own lies got her caught. Classic narcissism. Can't admit any wrongdoing under any circumstances. Sometimes I worry that I'm too narcissistic. Then I remember that doesn't make sense. Narcissism is sometimes categorized as an eccentric personality disorder. It has its tie-ins with schizophrenia. Basically living under a delusion. Self-awareness to the degree that you're worried at your behavior is a good sign, unless you're operating in a way that's compulsive, impulsive or manic. Don't read this unless you have a strong stomach. Attorney's wife here. I used to help him file away evidence and reports. Came across a file with video. Curiosity got the better of me, especially when husband told me not to watch it. File gives this story. Woman was at boyfriend's trailer out in the middle of nowhere. Got pissed off at boyfriend, so smacked him in the head with a metal bat and went on her merry way home. Boyfriend is apparently not a pleasant person and nobody really misses him or looks for him. He is fired from work in absentia. On day 7 boyfriend's neighbor finally stops by, hears horse screaming and calls police. That's where the video came from. Day 7. One of the cops was wearing a camera on his uniform. It shows him and his partner going through the house, finding dog shit all over the floor. Boyfriend's 2 Rottweilers, who were also in the house, went without food for about 6 days before they started eating bits and pieces of him. The camera shows the moment the cop found the body on its side, rolled it over, and he's blinking, eyes open, with most of his face gone. The woman didn't even bother to let THR damn dogs out before she left. I do not help file cases anymore. OMG. This should be one of the top comments. Dismembering a body after it's already dead is one thing. Being eaten alive with no one to check on you. That is some shit I never thought of.